I know why you're calling, and let me tell you, there's a process. And you have to be nominated by them, and I wanted to say, I have been. They're the ones that told me to call you, but I didn't say that.
Gerard Butler, Hollywood's rugged leading man, has worked with some of the industry's biggest names. But behind the scenes, not every partnership ended with smiles, red carpets, and champagne toasts. In fact, whispers suggest that Butler may have walked away from certain projects with less than glowing opinions of his co-stars. And while we're not saying he used the word hate, fans and insiders have long speculated about the 5 actors he seemed to clash with the most. So, who made this list? And why? Let's dive in. Gerard Butler's rise, struggles, and hidden grudges. How the hell did I get here? Gerard Butler has asked himself that question more times than he can count. He never trained as a singer, yet found himself voicing one of the most memorable Vikings in How to Train Your Dragon. He had no formal background in action epics, yet became immortalized as King Leonidas in 300. Time and again, Butler's career seemed built on improbable leaps of faith, moments when he felt unprepared but chose to dive headfirst, determined to silence the doubters. That hunger to prove people wrong became his fuel, the spark that transformed a Scottish law graduate into one of Hollywood's most commanding leading men. The journey, however, wasn't smooth. When the producers of 300 told him they wanted him, but feared presenting his name to Warner Brothers president Alan Horn, Butler realized that his dream role might slip through his fingers because of studio politics. Rather than accept defeat, he personally called Horn, prepared to fight for the role with nothing but raw conviction. Over coffee, he delivered a heartfelt plea. Every step of his life had led to that moment, and he swore he wouldn't let anyone down if given the chance. Horn said yes, and Butler kept his word. What followed was an obsessive, almost tunnel-visioned preparation. He pushed his body to the limit, trained relentlessly, and even convinced himself he was channeling Leonidas through some strange pull across time. The gamble worked. His battle cry, "This is Sparta," echoed far beyond cinema, becoming part of pop culture itself. Yet Butler's career wasn't just built on glory. He knew the sting of projects that seemed doomed before they even began. Take Den of Thieves. He first read the script in 2012 and loved it, but financing proved nearly impossible. For years he watched the project languish, wondering if it was time to give up. Still, he held on, convinced it was worth the fight. By the time production finally rolled, he had carried the character of Big Nick in his mind for so long that he almost feared forgetting how to bring him to life. But once the cameras rolled, his chaotic, unpredictable performance made the film unforgettable. Other roles stretched him in unexpected ways. Playing Jerry Kennedy in P.S. I Love You forced him to step outside his ego, embracing a tenderness shaped by real loss of the writer's best friend and the producer's sister. In Law-Abiding Citizen, he originally campaigned to play the heroic cop, until Jamie Foxx, in typical bold fashion, flipped the script and claimed that role for himself. Butler was pushed into the darker part of Clyde Shelton, a vengeful widower. It was a twist of fate that revealed how far audiences would follow him, even into the shadows of morality. Butler's career carried him through comedies like The Ugly Truth, romantic tragedies, high-octane blockbusters like Olympus Has Fallen, and family films that children still recognize him from today. He relished surprising people, one moment cracking crude jokes, the next embodying unwavering resilience. No matter the genre, he carried the weight of expectation, often masking insecurities with grit and humor. What fans rarely saw, however, were the personal battles behind the camera. For all the camaraderie he experienced on certain sets, there were others marked by quiet hostility. Hollywood can be a place of big smiles and hidden knives, where the same colleagues laughing beside you during press tours might undermine you once the cameras stop rolling. Butler, a man who thrived on trust and loyalty, carried the scars of those betrayals. They weren't anonymous critics or passing rivals. They were people he had worked closely with, people he thought he could depend on. Now, For the first time, Butler is ready to speak openly about those wounds. He's revealing the 5 names that shaped his Hollywood story, not through friendship, but through bitterness, tension, and at times, outright dislike. These weren't distant enemies. They were actors who shared the same spotlight, embraced him in public, but cut him deep in private. And today, he's finally breaking his silence. Stay with us as we uncover the first name on that list. Number 1. Zack Snyder. When Gerard Butler first crossed paths with Zack Snyder, it seemed like lightning striking twice. An untested director with an audacious vision and a hungry actor desperate for the role of a lifetime. Snyder was preparing to adapt Frank Miller's graphic novel 300, a stylized retelling of the Battle of Thermopylae. He needed an actor who could embody the ferocity and authority of King Leonidas, someone believable enough to lead 300 warriors against a colossal empire. Butler wanted that part with every fiber of his being. The trouble was, the studio didn't share Snyder's confidence. Butler wasn't yet a household name, and Warner Brothers hesitated to risk their multi-million-dollar gamble on an unproven lead. It was Snyder who first pushed for him, yet even his support couldn't quiet the executive's doubts. Butler remembers being told flatly, "We want you, but we're afraid to ask Alan Horn, the studio head. If he says no, the whole movie collapses." It was a brutal dilemma, but Butler refused to let his dream vanish in boardroom politics. He personally picked up the phone, called Horn, and arranged to meet him over coffee. Sitting across from the most powerful man at Warner Brothers, Butler delivered the most important speech of his life. Everything he had endured, every sacrifice, every disappointment, had led him to Leonidas. He promised, with raw conviction, that if given the chance, he would not fail. Against the odds, Horn relented. Butler had his role, but the hard part was only beginning. On set, Snyder's demands pushed Butler to his absolute breaking point. Training was punishing, bordering on obsessive. Butler chiseled himself into a warrior, rehearsing combat sequences until exhaustion blurred his vision. He meditated on Leonidas, convincing himself that the Spartan king's spirit coursed through him, whispering courage through the ages. When the cameras finally rolled and he bellowed, "This is Sparta!" the soundstage shook with energy. Crew members erupted, stuntmen cheered, and Snyder knew they had captured something iconic. It should have been the beginning of a lifelong bond between director and star. But Hollywood is rarely so kind. When 300 premiered in 2006, it exploded into a cultural phenomenon, redefining Snyder's visual style and earning him praise as a visionary. To audiences, Leonidas was unforgettable, but in industry circles, the narrative shifted. Snyder was hailed as the genius behind the spectacle, while Butler was often described as the lucky actor who happened to ride the wave. For a man who had nearly broken himself to embody that role, the whispers stung like betrayal. The unease deepened as Snyder's career soared. He was soon handed the keys to DC's superhero empire, directing Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. Meanwhile, Butler's path zigzagged. Action thrillers, romantic dramas, a few box office hits, and several costly misfires. Though 300 had put him on the map, it was Snyder's name that seemed etched into stone as the architect of its legacy. For Butler, it was as though his greatest triumph had been borrowed, the glory distributed unevenly. There were moments on set that still linger in his mind, moments that tested his trust in Snyder. One in particular cut deep. During the filming of a major fight sequence, a malfunctioning camera rig delayed production for hours. With daylight fading, producers whispered about replacing Butler with his stunt double to save time. Snyder, focused on logistics, didn't step in right away. It was Butler's stunt double, not Snyder, who told him, "This is your moment. You have to do this." Butler seized the chance, performed the scene flawlessly, and when the crew erupted in applause, he felt vindicated. Yet privately, he couldn't shake the sense that Snyder had hesitated when he most needed backing. Over the years, Butler never aired open hostility. In interviews, He still credited Snyder for believing in him, still spoke respectfully about the partnership that launched 300. But behind that polished tone was a quieter wound. Snyder represented the paradox of Hollywood for Butler, the man who gave him his defining role, yet also the figure whose towering shadow left him constantly fighting for recognition. Today, when Butler reflects on Snyder, his words carry a heaviness, gratitude laced with bitterness, admiration tangled with regret. To the outside world, they remain linked by one of cinema's most iconic films. But to Butler, Snyder became the first name etched into a private list of betrayals, someone who both opened the door and, in many ways, walked away with the key. And that was just the start. If Snyder's tale was ambition mixed with fading glory, the next name struck deeper. An actor beside Butler who exposed a side that left him shaken. Stay with us, because the second reveal is even more unsettling. Number 2, Jamie Foxx. If Zack Snyder was the director who gave Gerard Butler his defining role, then Jamie Foxx was the co-star who turned his Hollywood expectations upside down. Their paths crossed on the 2009 thriller Law-Abiding Citizen, a story about vengeance, corruption, and blurred morality. Butler had come on board not just as the lead actor, but also as one of the film's producers. For him, this was a chance to finally step into a role that broke away from his usual action hero mold. He wanted to play the avenging mastermind, Clyde Shelton, a grieving father who turns his pain into cold, calculated fury. Butler fought hard for that part, convinced it would showcase the depth and darkness he had long been waiting to unleash on screen. But Hollywood deals rarely unfold the way one imagines. Jamie Foxx, fresh off an Oscar win for Ray and basking in the glow of A-list stardom, was approached to co-star. From the beginning, Foxx exuded the confidence of a man who knew his worth. When the role of Clyde was offered to him, Foxx reportedly turned it down flat. He didn't see himself in the grieving family man, but he did see himself in the other role, the hotshot prosecutor Nick Rice, the film's ostensible hero. According to Butler, Foxx's exact words carried a cocky edge. "I'm not playing Clyde. I'll play Nick." That single declaration flipped the entire movie on its head. Butler, who had been circling the protagonist role from the start, suddenly found himself pushed into the darker, more sinister part. As a producer, he had little choice. To secure Foxx, the studio reshuffled the deck. For Butler, it was a moment of bitter irony. He was forced to surrender the role he had fought to create, giving it to a man who didn't even want it. At first, Butler convinced himself it might be a blessing in disguise. Playing Clyde Shelton would allow him to dive into the complex psychology of vengeance, to explore rage and pain in a way few roles had offered. But as production unfolded, the tension between the two actors simmered. Foxx's effortless charisma contrasted sharply with Butler's raw intensity, and the set became a silent battleground of egos. There were times when Butler felt Foxx's presence was more about dominance than collaboration. Foxx, with his quick wit and magnetic personality, often stole the spotlight during press tours and interviews, while Butler's contributions as both actor and producer seemed to fade into the background. On screen, Butler's Clyde terrified audiences with his ruthless genius. But off-screen, it was Foxx who controlled the narrative of the film's success. For Butler, the experience became both a triumph and a wound. Law-Abiding Citizen proved audiences were willing to follow him into darker territory, even rooting for his character long after his actions turned brutal. Yet, despite Butler's haunting performance, Foxx's star power ensured he remained the movie's center of gravity in the eyes of Hollywood. Once again, Butler felt overshadowed, this time not by a director, but by a fellow actor who had casually taken the part he once coveted. Privately, the sting went deeper. Butler prided himself on loyalty, on respecting the craft, and those who shared the screen with him. With Foxx, he sensed a different energy, sharp, competitive, almost dismissive. To Butler, it wasn't just about a role. It was about trust, about being undercut by someone who smiled alongside him in public, but tilted the playing field when the cameras weren't rolling. Looking back, Butler admitted that the dynamic fascinated him as much as it frustrated him. The psychological duel between Clyde and Nick mirrored their real-life tension, one man driven by principle and vengeance, the other by confidence and control. Audiences loved it, but for Butler, it blurred the line between performance and personal reality. To this day, Butler doesn't lash out at Fox in interviews. He remains diplomatic, often framing their collaboration as a bold, creative choice. Yet, those close to him say the grudge lingers. Fox wasn't just another co-star. He was the second name etched into that private list of actors who left scars. For Butler, Fox embodied a painful truth about Hollywood. Talent alone isn't enough. Sometimes the game is won by those who know how to bend the rules in their favor, and that truth would only cut deeper with the next name. If Fox represented a clash of egos and stolen roles, the third reveal takes us into even darker territory. A co-star whose off-screen behavior shocked Butler in ways he never saw coming. Stay with us. Number 3. Angelina Jolie. By 2003, Gerard Butler was still carving his path in Hollywood, taking roles that tested his range but hadn't yet cemented his status as a global star. That opportunity seemed to come when he landed the role of Terry Sheridan in Lara Croft, Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life. It wasn't just another action flick. It was a ticket into the orbit of one of the biggest names in the world at the time, Angelina Jolie. Fresh off her Oscar win for Girl, Interrupted, and already a tabloid fascination, Jolie was Hollywood royalty. For Butler, being cast opposite her was both exhilarating and intimidating. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Jolie's Lara Croft, the fierce and fearless adventurer, met her match in Butler's Sheridan, a rogue ex-Marine with charm, danger, and just enough vulnerability to make audiences root for him. Their scenes crackled with tension, equal parts attraction and rivalry. Off-screen, however, the dynamic was far less straightforward. Jolie carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew her power, both as an actress and as a global icon. Butler, still fighting for recognition, sometimes felt the imbalance. He was the rising star, she was the established force, and the production made no effort to hide it. Jolie's name was on the posters, Jolie set the tone on set, and Jolie was the one audiences were coming to see. For Butler, it was both an opportunity and a shadow, a chance to share the screen with greatness, but also a reminder of how far he still had to climb. Years later, when asked about working with Jolie, Butler made a comment that stirred controversy. With his usual Scottish wit, he joked, "She may have won the Oscar, but I think I really had to bring my acting down to do these scenes with her." He meant it as playful banter, the kind of line you toss out with a grin. But not everyone took it that way. Some called it cheeky, others said it was insensitive, suggesting he was belittling her talent. Butler brushed it off. He'd always been the kind of actor who used humor to deflect, but behind the laughter, there was a trace of truth. Working with Jolie had not been easy. She was disciplined, precise, and carried herself with the weight of someone who'd already proven herself. Butler, on the other hand, approached acting with raw energy, instinct, and emotional intensity. Their methods clashed. Jolie thrived on control. Butler thrived on chaos. At times, those differences created electricity. At others, they sparked friction. There were whispers from crew members about the coolness between them when the cameras stopped rolling. Jolie, ever professional, kept her distance, while Butler often tried to lighten the mood with jokes or playful remarks. Some landed, some didn't. For a man who thrived on camaraderie with his castmates, Butler felt the chill. Jolie wasn't unkind, but she wasn't warm either. She was focused, guarded, and clearly aware of the pedestal she stood on. That sense of distance lingered long after the film wrapped. Butler respected Jolie's talent. There was no denying she was magnetic on screen, but he also carried the sting of never truly connecting with her. In Hollywood, he had always craved trust, friendship, and loyalty from those he worked with. With Jolie, what he felt instead was a wall. a wall built out of professionalism, celebrity, and perhaps a dash of ego. The remark he made in later interviews about having to bring his acting down was, in a way, Butler's attempt to reclaim power in a dynamic where he'd often felt overshadowed. It was a joke, yes, but one layered with the frustration of being the supporting player in someone else's empire. Jolie walked away with her aura untarnished, while Butler walked away with lessons about how lonely it could feel to share the screen with someone untouchable. To this day, Butler rarely speaks Jolie's name without a grin, but those close to him know it's a complicated grin, equal parts admiration, rivalry, and a flicker of resentment. Jolie became the third name on his private list, not because of open hostility, but because of the subtle wounds left by distance, imbalance, and the coldness of a co-star he never quite reached. And so, the list deepened. If Snyder had been the director who tested his worth, and Foxx the co-star who seized his role, Jolie was the one who left him questioning whether chemistry on screen could ever make up for disconnection in real life. But Butler's story doesn't end there, because the next name shows how even those you laugh with on set can become the ones you never forgive. Number 4. Michael C. Hall. By the late 2000s, Gerard Butler was riding high on his reputation as Hollywood's gruff, battle-tested leading man. Fresh off the global success of 300 and the tense thrills of Law-Abiding Citizen, he was ready to experiment. That opportunity came with Gamer in 2009, a dystopian sci-fi action film where Butler played Cable, a death row inmate forced to fight for survival in a twisted virtual reality blood sport. It was the kind of role that let Butler flex his physicality while exploring deeper themes about freedom, control, and exploitation. But standing opposite him was Michael C. Hall, fresh from the acclaim of Dexter, and that's where the friction began. Hall was cast as Ken Castle, the eccentric billionaire mastermind behind the deadly game. From the start, his performance was nothing like what Butler expected. Hall leaned into flamboyance, delivering lines with a smirk, breaking into song and dance routines, and twisting his villain into something theatrical and surreal. To many viewers, this contrast was fascinating. Butler's grim, grounded intensity clashed with Hall's eccentric menace, giving the film a unique texture. But for Butler himself, the pairing felt unbalanced, like they were making two entirely different movies. Butler had always approached roles with a soldier's discipline. He prepared, he trained, he lived inside the skin of his characters. Hall, on the other hand, seemed to treat Gamer as an experimental playground, bending reality with every scene he touched. On set, this difference in style created tension. Butler often found himself struggling to match Hall's offbeat energy without compromising his own vision of Cable as a tragic, haunted figure. To him, the clash wasn't just artistic, it was disruptive. The breaking point came during one of the film's most infamous sequences. Hall's bizarre dance number, set to Sinatra's "I've Got You Under My Skin." Butler had expected a standard showdown between hero and villain. What he got instead was Hall strutting across the screen like a Broadway performer in a sci-fi nightmare. For audiences, the scene was either brilliantly unsettling or completely baffling. For Butler, it was maddening. He later hinted in interviews that the moment felt less like storytelling and more like self-indulgence, an actor using the stage to showcase quirks rather than serve the film's heart. Behind closed doors, Butler reportedly vented his frustrations. He respected Hall's talent. Dexter had proven his skill, but he questioned whether Hall was the right fit for Gamer. To Butler, the movie's gritty dystopia demanded seriousness, not camp. Instead of elevating the tension, Hall's flamboyance, in Butler's view, undercut it, making Cable's struggle feel less urgent and more absurd. The Scottish actor had poured himself into creating a grounded, tortured protagonist, only to find the villain beside him rewriting the tone with every scene. The box office results didn't help. Gamer opened to lukewarm numbers and mixed reviews. Some critics praised Hall's eccentricity as the only spark in an otherwise bleak narrative, while others slammed the film for being tonally inconsistent. Butler felt the sting personally. For him, This wasn't just a commercial disappointment. It was another instance where his commitment seemed overshadowed, this time by a co-star whose choices pulled focus in a way Butler never intended. And that frustration lingered. To Butler, acting was about trust. Trust that your co-star would meet you halfway. Trust that the shared story would matter more than individual flourishes. With Hall, that trust had cracked. He never spoke cruelly of him in public, but those who knew Butler well said the resentment remained. Hall's flamboyant villain hadn't just disrupted the movie. It had left Butler questioning whether all his sacrifices, the training, the discipline, the sleepless nights, were sometimes wasted when others treated the craft like a stage for experimentation. So Michael C. Hall became the fourth name on Butler's unspoken list, not because of personal betrayal or ego-driven feuds, but because of a deeper artistic clash that felt like betrayal in its own right. Butler believed in grit, in truth, in bleeding for the story. Hall brought theater, irony, and spectacle, and when the two collided, it was Butler who walked away with the scars. But one name remained, the sharpest cut of all. This co-star's off-screen choices left Butler facing artistic tension and personal disappointment. Stay tuned. The final reveal may be the most unsettling yet. Number 5. Katherine Heigl. By the time Gerard Butler signed on to star in The Ugly Truth in 2009, his career was in a fascinating transition. He had proven himself as a warrior king in 300, a vengeance-driven mastermind in Law-Abiding Citizen, and even lent his voice to animation in How to Train Your Dragon. What he hadn't yet conquered was the romantic comedy, a genre dominated by charm, wit, and light-hearted chemistry rather than grit and battle scars. For Butler, The Ugly Truth was supposed to be that turning point. And for Katherine Heigl, fresh from her breakout success in Knocked Up and the rising fame of Grey's Anatomy, it was another chance to solidify herself as Hollywood's rom-com queen. On paper, the pairing was golden. Butler would play Mike Chadway, a brash and unapologetically crude TV personality, while Heigl took on Abby Richter, the sharp but romantically unlucky producer forced to work alongside him. The script promised sparks, both comic and romantic, and studio executives envisioned the kind of friction that translates into box office magic. But the reality on set was far more complicated. Heigl was known in Hollywood for being outspoken, never shying away from voicing her opinions about scripts, roles, or even her own projects. Butler, meanwhile, thrived on improvisation, energy, and letting loose in front of the camera. From the start, their creative styles clashed. Heigl preferred structure and precision, while Butler often went off-script, riffing with crude jokes that didn't always land the way the script intended. To audiences, this might have looked like natural chemistry. Behind the scenes, it sometimes felt more like a tug-of-war. Butler revealed that he was madly in love with Heigl at the start of filming, enchanted by her striking beauty and razor-sharp presence. But as production continued, admiration shifted into frustration. Heigl's bluntness and refusal to compromise often clashed with Butler's improvisational instincts, leaving him confined by her precision. What he had imagined as a playful, free-spirited role became a constant struggle for balance. What really left a mark, however, was what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. Heigl, in several interviews following the film's release, made comments that rubbed Butler and many others the wrong way. She critiqued the film's tone, called out its raunchiness, and implied it leaned too heavily on crass humor rather than genuine heart. To Butler, these remarks weren't just casual observations, they felt like betrayals. This was a film they had poured months of work into together, a film that relied on their shared chemistry to succeed. For her to publicly distance herself from it, after the fact, felt like having the rug pulled out from under him. The irony was that audiences did turn out. The Ugly Truth became a box office hit, grossing over $200 million worldwide. But the sting of Heigl's public critiques lingered for Butler. Hollywood is built on fragile trust. Trust that your co-star will stand beside you not just on set, but in the press, in interviews, in the narrative that follows a film's release. For Butler, Heigl broke that trust. The tension wasn't explosive enough to derail the movie, but it was sharp enough to leave a scar. Over the years, Butler has been diplomatic. When asked about his experience working with Heigl, he jokes about their differences, even calls her brilliant in certain respects. But those who know him best understand the truth. The ugly truth was, in many ways, exactly that. Behind the smiles and staged interviews, their collaboration was marked by creative collisions, sharp words, and a lingering sense of betrayal. And so, Katherine Heigl became the final name etched onto Butler's private list. She wasn't an enemy in the traditional sense. There was respect, even admiration, but she represented a deeper kind of wound. The wound of standing shoulder to shoulder with someone on screen, only to feel them step away once the spotlight shifted. Looking back, Butler's Hollywood journey was defined not only by his roles, but by the people shaping them. Zack Snyder's relentless demands pushed him to his limits. Jamie Foxx blindsided him with a role swap that altered a film's fate. Angelina Jolie turned playful teasing into a subtle clash of egos. Michael C. Hall's theatrical flamboyance disrupted him, and Katherine Heigl left him questioning loyalty itself. These co-stars reminded him that, in Hollywood, the fiercest battles aren't on screen, but in the quiet spaces between cut and action. For Butler, those moments left scars no camera could ever capture. So, what do you think? Were Butler's fiercest battles fought off-screen, with egos, betrayals, and broken trust shaping his journey more than roles ever did? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.